Boxing truth here. Danny Jacobs is in very serious danger of being exposed as a protected bum throughout his whole career. The Human Protection Program has ended, no longer being a protected fighter, no longer being cared for. Now he's going into the lion's den, signing an HBO contract, an HBO deal, which has cursed fighters in the past like Vernon Forrest. A lot of limelight, a lot of exposure, a lot of hype surrounding Danny Jacobs, all because he went 12 rounds against Gennady Golovkin. In many ways, that loss has been a win for Jacobs as he's entering his first showcase on HBO against Luis Arias. Luis Arias is an undefeated guy, up-and-coming guy, well-rated contender, very hungry, coming off a good win in his last fight on the Kovalev Ward rematch undercard back in June. And this is unfamiliar territory for Danny Jacobs because he's been involved in the Human Protection Program, has been coddled, has been taken care of, has been feasted a number of no-hopers since he's recovered from his illness. Understandable. They had to be careful with him. They had to match him the right way. But now Danny Jacobs is full of confidence, full of belief after finally taking that big step and fighting the #1 middleweight in the world at the time he fought him in Triple G and giving a good account of himself. Lost, but was competitive. And now that's what Danny Jacobs needed. He needed that type of performance where he felt that he was hanging in there with Golovkin, and now him and his manager, Keith Connolly, are in belief that he can hang with the big boys. He is fully rehabilitated, and they have the confidence going forward that they can hang with the best, the young, hungry contenders, the top contenders, and eventually fight the David Lemieux and go on to the big money fight against the Canelo Triple G rematch winner. That's what Jacobs needed. He needed some confidence booster, and he got that against Gennady Golovkin. But since that fight, Golovkin has, a lot of people feel he arguably lost to Canelo. May not be the best middleweight in the world. It's up for debate at the very least until they lock horns in May of next year. But for Jacobs, now he's gonna really get a chance to prove how good he is, and if he's really fully rehabilitated, and if he's really the real deal and not just a top contender who is challenged for world titles but never officially got over that hump. He's never officially been a world champion. This is his next step to going that route. But you look at his resume, I mean, it's filled with a bunch of cannon fodder, a lot of wastemen, faded guys, feather-fisted fighters with no knockout power, domestic level fighters, Euro bums. You go by his resume before the Pirog fight. His best win was a 54-pounder in Ishe Smith, a career 54-pounder, who had 3 losses going into that fight. Ishe Smith was always a pretty good fighter, had some left when he fought Danny Jacobs at that time, but he was a career 54-pounder. Smaller guy who moved up in weight to fight Danny Jacobs. Jacobs beat him by unanimous decision. I remember that fight. It was pretty competitive. That Jacobs got the unanimous decision. That was his best win up to that date. And then he fought a young, hungry contender, up and coming in the ranks, well rated into Dmitry Pirog, and got knocked out. And since that defeat, was being rehabilitated, fought a bunch of low-level guys to build up his confidence, guys that can't punch, Jared Fletcher's, the Caleb Truaxes of the world. Then finally stepped up with Mora, got kind of exposed, got dropped by a feather-fisted Sergio Mora. Was able to get a very quick, fast win against Peter Quillen. Didn't really get a good feel on that fight because he landed one punch and Quillen was already out of there in a somewhat of a bad stoppage by Harvey Dock that night. Somewhat of a bad stoppage. Should have gave Quillen a chance, to recover. looks pretty mediocre against Moore in the rematch. Knocked him down a few times. Moore is a faded guy. Was a former champion, fighting at a higher weight class. Can't punch. Coming off an injury. Long layoff. It was what it was. Then he has the fight against Gennady Golovkin. And in that fight, I noticed that Golovkin never really had too many shots on Jacobs' sweet spot, which is his chin. And the one time he landed a good punch on it, Jacobs was on the mat. He got dropped. But most of the big punches Golovkin landed was on the top of the temple, on the bridge of Jacobs' nose, with the jab on his forehead. He never really got that big shot on the point of Jacobs' chin. So that's what Luis Arias is looking to expose. I mean, Luis Arias is talking major trash. Thinks Danny Jacobs is a protected bum, has been coddled, has been well taken care of by his team. And he wants to expose to the boxing world that Danny Jacobs is a protected bum. He wants to remind the boxing world that that chin has already been checked, has been dropped numerous times, and that Danny Jacobs' chin is suspect. He's going to get his chance, and Danny Jacobs, this is unfamiliar territory. This is something he hasn't done much in his career. He's fighting a young, hungry contender coming up in the ranks, full of bravado, full of confidence. And the last time he fought a young, hungry contender like this, undefeated, he was knocked out. So this is not the type of opponent Danny Jacobs is awfully matched with. He's awfully matched with guys that are a little faded, not big punchers, not very confident going into fights, a trash Peter Quillen, overrated Peter Quillen. So this is a good test to see where Jacobs is at off the loss against Gennady Golovkin. And I watched Arias fight, his last fight. He's a pretty good fighter. He's going to throw up some resistance. He's going to throw some big punches. He's a pretty good body puncher with his right hand and his left hook. He has a very good overhand right. He has enough power to trouble Jacobs if he touches that weak chin. And it's going to be a big risk by Matchroom, Eddie Hearn, HBO to sign this guy to a multi-fight deal, because he's going to have to beat a young, hungry contender to get to those bigger fights. So this is Danny Jacobs' chance to prove that he's not a protected bum, because if he loses to Luis Arias, that's exactly what's going to happen. That's going to be the narrative. That's going to be what people are going to say, that Luis Arias just exposed Danny Jacobs as a protected bum. If he defeats Danny Jacobs on November 11th, live on HBO. This is Boxing Truth. I'm out.